people are coming in. Good morning, everyone. We're just waiting for our participants to get into the webinar, and then we will begin. Okay, I just want to give a few more seconds. It looks like we've got 37 people logged in so far. Oops, more coming in. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Spring Gardening webinar series presented by the Central Oregon Master Gardeners, Oregon State University, and our sponsors. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful, snowy April day. We need the precipitation and it's cold, but we're thrilled to see it. My name is Vicki Miner and I will be your host. Another Master Gardener assisting is Lisa Nakadati, and she's behind the scenes today, but you can see her right now. Our presenter is Toni Stephan, and she'll be talking to us about how to create a place for pollinators in our yards. But first, some housekeeping matters. All videos and microphones are off, as you can see from our slide, except for our presenter. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A window, and we will reserve time at the end to answer anything that was not addressed during the slide presentation. This is being recorded and it will be available online for a short period of time after we're done today. A few days after the session, you'll get an email with a link to access the recording. Okay, so let me tell you about Toni. Toni is a horticulture and small farms instructor for OSU Deschutes County Extension. She's also been a Master Gardener since 1998. In 2018, she joined the Oregon Bee Atlas as a volunteer to help identify the native bee species in the state. Since then, she's been learning how to identify bees and how to help create a welcoming habitat for them. Many pollinators are suffering due to loss of habitat and floral resources. However, research shows that even the smallest of home gardens is beneficial for our pollinators. This class will cover some of the things every gardener can do to help our pollinators, and a photo show including ornamental and native plants for our local pollinators, primarily native bees, will be part of the presentation. But before we get completely started, we'd like to get a little bit of information from you. So we'd like to do a short poll. So Lisa, if you could launch that poll, please. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody populating yet. There we go. Perfect.
Okay, and it looks like most people have responded to the poll, so I'm going to close the poll now.
Go ahead, please, and share the results. Okay, so Toni, can you see all of that? And you're on mute, so you need to.
I can. Oh, let me just give me a second to look at the bottom one, at the last one. Wow, everybody's pretty good knowledge. Yeah. Okay, we'll
Okay.
go into this shortly. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, so Lisa, go ahead and you can close it. And at this point, everyone, thank you for being here again. And I'm going to turn this over to Toni. There you go. And once you get your screen shared, we're good.
Yeah, I'm working on it. Here we go.
Perfect.
Okay, let me just move this out of my way here. There we go. I think I can actually do that. All right. I'm on, right, Vic? Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming today. And I'm specifically talking about native bees in your yard and how to attract them. But if you attract native bees, you're obviously going to be attracting other pollinators too.
So
It's I
Did
don't
you
know why
click?
it's not moving, Vicki.
did you, do you have it? Is there a little arrow on the
Oh,
lower?
they're finally here. They just now showed up. Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
That's where you
Just
need to
now
be.
showed up.
You
Yep,
just
I
click
got
on
it. They
Okay.
were not there, I swear.
Okay, that's okay. You can advance now. There you
Right.
go. Perfect.
So there's a wide variety of pollinators, insects, birds, bats, and other mammals. Wind and yeah, even water is serves as a pollination process. But by far the best of these are bees. These are the best pollinators for several reasons. First of all, they purposely collect pollen because they use pollen to rear their young. The number of young that they rear is completely dependent on the amount of pollen they collect. Also, bees have special hairs, and they have that are kind of feathery. They're not straight or anything, but they're specially designed to collect the pollen, and they have a negative charge, so that pollen clings to their body better than it does to other insect bodies. And they often go to the same types of flowers when they're foraging, so they can take pollen of specific flowers to the same kind of flower. Each one of these that you see this big bee on right now is an individual flower. You can see globs of pollen right here. And as she's walking through the flower, she's dropping pollen at the same time onto plants or flowers that can actually use that pollen. So some people don't know that honeybees are not native bees. They were actually imported from Europe in the 1600s. They form what's called a perennial hive. So that lives just like a perennial in your garden year after year after year. And these hives have thousands of individuals. They make lots of honey and they make wax that humans make use of. And they're actually very important pollinators for many of our crops. But people, you don't have to raise honeybees to help the pollinators. People who are not interested in producing honey have an easier option for attracting pollinators and helping pollinators, and that's through planting a garden for your native bees. Native bees do not have the same strategy that honeybees have for their life cycle and their nesting process. The closest native bee that we have that is most similar to that of a honeybee is a bumblebee. Now, a bumblebee forms a small colony of maybe 50 to 100 workers at any one given time. But this colony is an annual colony. So in other words, the queen bumblebee, the queen, is mated in the fall, and then she overwinters somewhere in the garden, hopefully. And then when she comes out in the spring, she looks for a little rodent nest or a hole under some grasses or something like that. And she starts a new nest with new eggs and new offspring. By the end of the year, that entire colony dies, except for new queens that are created in the fall who are then mated. But most of our bees don't have this social instinct. They're more solitary. And so in a solitary bee's life, the mated female will build the nest, provision the nest, lay all the eggs, and she dies within about 4 to 6 weeks of emerging from, from winter's rest herself. She only lives 4 to 6 weeks and then she dies. And then the next year, her offspring will start the cycle all over again. Since the inception of the Oregon Bee Atlas in 2018, we've identified over 600 species of native bees in the state of Oregon. So how does one attract native bees to your yard? Well, creating habitat where pollinators complete their life cycle is important for their continued existence. So we can do this by layering the landscape, which means using plants of different heights and forms, such as these conifers in the background, the shrubs and so forth. And yes, even grass can be habitat for bees. Now this really kind of meadowy grass like this is an excellent spot because it has a lot of space in between the individual plants. And so there's plenty of bare ground like this, which most of our solitary bees use as their nesting site. So you say, I don't have a big property, I can't do this. Well, sure you can, okay? Here's a property in Bend that is layered very nicely. You can see the large pine in the back, and then the shrubs and the smaller conifers here, and then the floral resources. But the nice thing about these small lots in cities and so forth is, guess what? Your neighbor's yard is part of your habitat or part of the habitat that's provided for your pollinators that you want. So it's not just your yard, it's the surrounding places too in small lots. Now, 70% of our native bees are ground nesters. Here we see some entrances highlighted by the yellow arrows to some bees' nests. Bees like to make their nests where they can see more, or they can get morning sun, because this helps them to warm up more quickly and get out and about. Not only do we have these two sites right here, but I think there's another bee entry right here, another bee nest right here, and yet a smaller one, probably a different kind of bee, even right here. So just in this one shot alone, there's probably at least 5 bee nests in that small area. You can see my garden gloves. It's really not that big of an area. The one thing we know about bees is they like sunny locations. They like to work in the sun. You've probably noticed that when the sun goes behind clouds and stuff, bees disappear. So the same thing in your yard. If you have a very shady yard, you're probably not going to be able to attract very many bees. So you're going to need to work on opening up some for some sunlight. 30% of our native bees, if 70% are ground nesters, then 30% are cavity nesters. So keeping old logs such as this snag right here, okay, or bee blocks kind of right here. Twigs with hollow or pithy stems are great for cavity dwellers. You want to use a wide variety of nectar plants, and nectar is what provides the quick energy for the pollinators. It contains things like sugar and amino acids, vitamins and minerals for the bees. You also want to stagger your bloom time because you need to have pollen and nectar present throughout the season. Pollen is the source of protein for some adults, and it's the absolute source of protein for bee larvae, because that's what the mama bee puts in the nest, lays her eggs, lays her egg on the protein ball, and then seals off that compartment. So pollen contains small amounts of starch and sugars, fats or oils, minerals, and other things to create that healthy bee. excuse me. Even though it's good to mulch around your plants in your garden, because we know that mulch keeps the soil temperature more regulated, keeps a little cooler, and keeps the weeds down. Native bees cannot dig through that mulch. I mean, some of these guys are tiny, and so they can't dig through that mulch. So I want to just kind of talk about this photo right here and say, how could we create some strategies to open up some bare ground for our native bees? Well, we take a look at this beautiful snag. The mulch is all the way up to it. So how about we pull the mulch away a foot, or at least a foot away from that snag, and therefore we've created some bare ground. Under these large clumps of flowers, of plants, is a great area to pull your mulch away a little bit and give the bees area of just native soil. And look, even here in this rock wall, or this retaining wall, where rocks meet each other, a lot of times mulch kind of builds up in those areas. Check those out and pull the mulch away. That's an excellent place to have bare soil for your bees. Well, we know that insect populations have been declining. They've declined like 40% over the last 50 years. And part of this is due to habitat loss. Though many humans like this nice, tidy, neat garden, or we live in an area that you have to absolutely have that nice, tidy, neat garden, insects like it more like this, okay? There's lots of hiding places. There's lots of places to lay their eggs or develop as a pupa or a chrysalis, and so forth. And so if we eliminate this kind of situation, then we eliminate our insects. So here's what I'm trying to convince people to leave their garden looking like during the winter. Because guess what? There may be bee larvae in some of these twigs. There may be moth pupa or butterfly chrysalises, beneficial insect eggs on some of this debris. And so leave it. If you can leave it, leave it. If you can't leave it, I've been thinking of a strategy that I can tell people that I think is going to work. I've actually been talking to a lot of bee experts about this, and I've got different answers. So I formulated this sort of through conversation and thinking about the bees themselves. Leafcutter bees are probably the last bee to come out in the summer, and they've come out, I'm going to say, about July-ish. And so, yeah, we need now to be cleaning up our gardens. I mean, the plants are starting to grow. We can't wait till July to clean up the garden, right? So here's the idea. Go ahead into your garden, cut out, prune out the dead stuff, the old stuff, the stuff that you don't want, the stuff that's interfering with the new growth. But don't burn it. Don't throw it away. Don't compost it. Instead, pile it up in a secluded portion of your yard, or hide it with some kind of, fencing or barrier that other people can't see it if you live in HOAs or something like that, and leave that stuff until about the middle of July. And then that's the time to do what you would normally do with it. That gives all of the insects that were using that material time to emerge and start into the world. It builds your insect resources, and now in middle of July or August is the right time to get rid of this stuff. That's my idea. So there's a lot of competition among plants to attract the various pollinators. In order to lure these pollinators and bees in, plants have devised schemes to do that. One of these schemes is color. You can see here from this graphic that humans see in red, green, blue, bees see in UV green and blue, and birds see in UV red, green, and blue. Because there's different attractions to these flowers, pollinators are going to choose different ones and not always looking for the same stuff that every other pollinator is looking for. Another scheme that flowers use are called nectar guides. These guides are like neon lights to humans. Come here, come here, come here. Well, these nectar guides do the same thing with the pollinators. They're directing them to the source of pollen and nectar within the flowers. And they're going to have different types of nectar guides. So different pollinators may use, different pollinators may use the same resources. But I had a question. Somebody asked a question about territorialism and pollinators. I don't really see this as too big of a problem in my garden because the birds, the hummingbirds specifically, like pretty much specific plants. Now they might be territorial to another hummingbird, but they're not chasing off bees and they're not chasing off flies per se. Bees will chase off other bees. Wasps will chase off bees and flies and so forth. But there's a little bit of territorialism, but I don't think that it's really a problem if you have enough different kinds of flowers in your garden. Now, sometimes insects bypass the nectar guides because they don't have a long enough tongue maybe to get in this flower of the Arctostaphylos, the manzanita, or they're too big to get into it. So they'll cheat and they'll chew a hole at the base of the flower and sip the nectar from the side. Obviously, this isn't any good for pollination because they bypass the pollination strategy of that plant. And so now that plant or that particular flower is not going to produce a seed. You want diverse types of flowers in your garden so that, as I said, you're attracting different pollinators to different plants. You want the different bloom times, but you want different kinds of plants throughout the bloom time from spring to fall. Different sizes, shapes, and scents are really important, and they're going to be attracting different bees. Here on the left, you can see a little Lasioglossum dialectus on this Dusty Maiden, which is, let me check my notes, Dusty Maiden Chenactis Douglasii. Now the flowers on this Dusty Maiden are maybe 3/8 of an inch long individually. And so you can tell this is not a very big bee, but she's loving that. In the center, you see one of the Andrenidae genera. This is Calliopesis. Oh my gosh, she is a beautiful bee. And she's on this California poppy. Now, California poppy doesn't produce nectar, but it produces copious amounts of pollen. And she just wallows in this pollen and just loads up her body. And then you can see on her legs, kind of right here, she's going to move all the pollen that's over her body. She's going to eventually move it down on this portion of her leg and take off with it. But oh my goodness, they're so fun to watch in those California poppies. On the far right, we have a bombus reaching for the nectar in this Agastache. Now, bombus are fortunate. They have a really long tongue, so they can reach the nectar in that long tube of that Agastache. Another strategy that plants use is to produce oils and resins or waxes. Here we see a little Dianthidium species collecting this sticky resin off of this desert sweet or fern bush, Chamaebateria millefolium. That's a native in our area. She's going to use this resin to actually construct her nest. Dianthidians, the Dianthidians such as this little bee, will actually nest in the ground, in pithy stems, in beetle tunnels, pre-existing twig cavities or beetle tunnels. And this little bee will actually take small pieces of pebble or small pebbles, probably sand in our mind, and she'll use this resin to glue them together and kind of make a little hut for her offspring there, for her larvae. Pretty cute. There you see, this is a mating pair of Dianthidiums. The male in this photo is doing his job. His job is to mate with the female and pass on his DNA.
Tony, we don't see that slide.
You don't see right here, the
Yeah,
male.
oh, there, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. I thought you'd gone to another slide. My
No,
apologies.
No, that's okay. Thank you. Thank you for, I did not point out that the male was right here, but he's doing his job. His job is to pass on his DNA. And then as soon as he does that, he's going to, you know, very shortly after that, he dies. His job is done. He has nothing to do with the rest of the process, creating the nest, provisioning for the young, and of course, laying eggs. So you remember I said earlier in the talk that bees, the amount of pollen they collect is directly related to how many offspring they can produce. So if you plant in large clumps, so the bee can go from flower to flower to flower, which bees do, it's called flower constancy. They can collect pollen very quickly, and they also pass the pollen to the correct flowers that can use it so that pollination occurs. But this really is critical because it saves the bee time and energy, and she can therefore make more offspring. Records indicate the bees have been frequenting plants from the Asteraceae family for 55 million years, at least 55 million years. And it still serves as one of the main plant families of preference for many bees, and especially bee specialists in our area. And so I'm just, with this photo right here, I'm just saying, if you can only plant one type of flower, plant an aster, because there are more bees that use asters than any other type of flower. So in summary about creating habitat and having floral resources and so forth, before we go into the slideshow of the bees and plants that they use, I just want to summarize by saying the more of the following attributes that you can include in your garden, the more bees you're going to have, and absolutely the more pollinators you'll have. So we want to have that habitat. For bees, we need bare ground and we need cavities. We need native plants mixed in with our ornamental plants, because native plants are what the bees have grown up with, and specialist bees will use native plants, whereas generalist bees will use your ornamentals just fine. Include snags and logs and rocks in your garden wherever you can, and pull that mulch back so that the bees have plenty of nesting resources. And as much as possible, preserve your garden cleanings until July, mid-July, if you can. The next thing is, with your floral resources, again, there's a theme here. Have native nectar and pollen all season long, along with your ornamentals. There's nothing wrong with mixing ornamentals and natives together. I am not a purist. Many people are, a lot of people are, and they will say you shouldn't have ornamentals, but hey, have ornamentals. They increase the number of colors, the flower size and shapes that you can include in your garden. And so, you know, for us, we need a little bit more eye candy sometimes than the natives can provide. And of course, as I just said, select asters, plenty of asters. Now, some of the techniques that you should use or could use in your garden that would help preserve our insects, our native bees. Reduce your pesticide use. I know some of you don't use pesticides. Yay, great for you. But some people have a little bit less time, maybe a little larger properties, and the use of some pesticides, specifically herbicides, are probably important processes on those properties. So herbicides are not the kind of pesticide that's going to kill an insect. It kills the weeds that the insects may be using early and late in the season as extra floral resources, but it doesn't hurt the bees. The pesticide that hurts insects is insecticides, therefore it's in the name. So, you know, so try to reduce the amount of insecticides that you're using in your garden. Bees need sunlight, so open up or put your garden in the sun. Most flowering plants, a lot of flowering plants need sunlight. And so they go hand in hand. Include many natives, use drought tolerant plants, especially, yay, we're getting a little bit of precipitation the last week and a half. Thank goodness. But we're still in the desert. We're still going through climate change and will be for a long time. So, think about drought tolerant plants, which of course, most of our natives are. And use drip irrigation as much as you can. Studies have shown that spray irrigation, I don't really know what it does, but I think it must wash the pollen off, or at least make it so that it's no longer viable. So if you have to irrigate early in the morning and try and use those low pressure, like micro spray heads that maybe don't wash the pollen as hard. Okay, so I asked you at the beginning, how many bee families do we have in Oregon? And quite a number of you said 5. Excellent. That's the choice I gave you. It's kind of a little bit of a lie because in 2020 there was one Hesperapus collected far eastern border of Oregon, happened to be still in Oregon. And this was from the 6th family, but you're not going to see it in your backyard. So I'm still sticking with 5 for the number of bees or the bee families that we'll see here in Central Oregon. The first of these is the Andrenidae. They're early spring bees for the most part. They're mining bees. They make their nests in the ground. They have the smallest bee species, I'm sorry, smallest bee species in North America, in the hot deserts, New Mexico, Utah, and so forth. The smallest bee is 2 millimeters in length. The bee that you see right here is a little Perdita, same genus. On the left-hand side, a little tiny Perdita. She's a specialist on some of our rabbit brush. This one on the pin is about 5 millimeters. So she's a little bit more than twice the size of the smallest bee in North America. Andrena also have my very most, I don't know if it's my very most favorite, but boy, I love this bee. This is called the death camas bee, and she is very much a specialist. She specializes on one plant, the death camas. This is Andrena astragali. That's her name, Andrena astragali, death camas bee. Now, you may know, or you may have read that death camas pollen or death camas plants are poisonous. They're toxic. They'll kill livestock. There were some kids in Bend a few years ago that ate them thinking they were wild onions, had to be rushed over to Portland, I think, and because of the toxicity. But this little bee is the only bee, the only fly, the only insect that I think the only insect that can actually take that pollen, make her little pollen bead, put her eggs on it, and rear her young on this toxic pollen. I think she's such a special bee to be able to do stuff like this. But in the middle, we see the family Apidae, which has the bees of most economic importance for us. Okay, they're also the bees that we recognize the most. Honeybees are in this group. Bumblebees are in this group. There's a whole lot of bees in this group. And we know due to the honeybees, the economic value this group has. On the far right, we see the Callididae. There are only 2 genera of Callididae in Oregon. One, the Callides, which is called the cellophane bee. She actually exudes a substance out of her abdomen that is like cellophane that she uses to seal off the inside lining of her nest. We know and see that tongue on her. It's called a bilobe tongue. She uses this tongue to pack that cellophane all along the walls of her nest to create that waterproof barrier. Sorry. And this waterproof barrier, then these Callides bees have been known to make their nests under water line. And then when the rivers or something fills up, lakes come up, they'll actually be able to hold all winter long, and it won't damage the new larvae developing at all because it's waterproof. The second genus in this family is called Hylaeus. Now take a look at this little bee. Doesn't that look like a wasp? That looks like a, if I didn't know better, I'd be thinking that's a wasp. And they are very wasp-like. Now this bee is not a great pollinator. Look, it doesn't have hardly any hair at all. But the hairs that it does have are bee hairs. And so it will pick up a little bit of pollen, but they're not great at pollinating. They actually ingest the pollen in the nectar and then fly back home, and they'll regurgitate that pollen and nectar and make their little pollen beads for their young that way. So they're not carrying any pollen on the outside of their body. So they're not passing much at all. Lousy pollinators. So that was another question on the poll. Are all bees good pollinators? Nope. And so the Calides are ground nesters, and the Hylaeus are twig nesters or cavity nesters. Now we have two more families of bees. Families of bees that we have, and you'll see in your backyard. The Halictidae are probably the most abundant bee family anywhere, and you'll see them. You might not recognize them as bees because some of them are pretty small, and you might think it's a little fly, but it's, depending on if it's collecting pollen and has these hairs, then it's a little bee. They have multiple nesting strategies because some of them start early in the spring, and they'll kind of like have a colony. And that colony will live with different bees passing in and out, passing in and out. Maybe the queen will die too, and another large sister will become the queen, because these are all fertile and they are all able to lay eggs. So, they also can turn absolutely solitary. So they can either be semi-social or solitary, depending on the environment, where they are, the resources, and so forth. So they're pretty cool. The Halictidae family has bees that are in the genus Halictus, like this bee right here, and Lasioglossum, which looks very similar. The only difference is where the white bands begin on them, but it's too much to go into detail here. But it also has this Agapostemon, the green metallic bee, that is just a flying jewel in the garden. The last family is the Megachilidae. These two are of economic importance in the fact that the leafcutter bee, Megachile rodentata, and Nomia melanderi are both important for pollinating alfalfa. But there are some bees that have been brought in, some anthidiums that have become very invasive. And so we do have a couple of bees in this family that are invasive. Now this bee that I have a photo of here, I just love this little guy. He's a male leafcutter bee. Notice that he is all dressed up and ready to go to the ball. I mean, doesn't this boy look attractive? And if you were this girl, you might just really dig this guy. So this is a female leafcutter bee, and here are her pollen collecting hairs on the bottom of her abdomen. That's where leafcutter bees carry their pollen, on the bottom of their abdomen. So any bee that's carrying pollen on the bottom of its abdomen, is in this Megachilidae family. And we get questions in Plant Clinic about this kind of damage on roses, lilacs, and many other plants. This is the cutout of a leaf disc that the female leafcutter bee is going to take and use to provision her nest. She lines the nest all with it. She uses leaf pieces to separate the chambers of every egg she lays. These are great mamas. They're giving their kids a bedroom all to themselves. all solitary bees give each of their kids a bedroom all to themselves. But anyway, she takes this disc and she lines her nest cavity. And so if you see this happening in your yard, it's very distinctive, kind of a ovalish cut. This is leaf cutter. You know that pollination is happening with your flowers because the bees are there and they're visiting your flowers and they're just borrowing pieces of leaf so that they can make new babies for next year. So something you actually would want to see. All right, here we go into the plant and bee part of this presentation. So one of the earliest, probably the earliest blooming plant we have is the greenleaf manzanita. It is native. It's rather drought tolerant once it gets established. I think it probably is going to want a little bit more organic matter than our desert soils have. I mean, we see it growing up in the forested lands natively much better than it grows down here. But we have caught, oh, I bet you 6 different types of osmia, like this Osmia densa, this Osmia montana. Both of these are in the same genus, but they're different species, and they're all over this plant. The one thing I'm curious about this greenleaf manzanita is I've seen it blooming is in early March. There are very few bees out and there's not many other floral resources. So I'm wondering if it's really a good thing for the bees to be out that soon. I just don't really know. And of course, then we have other things like this Usra, this spring longhorn bee, and his mates that would use this manzanita as floral resources. I think these guys are so beautiful. They're called longhorn bees because look at the length of their antenna. I mean, that antenna, if it's stretched out, actually goes about to the middle of the back of his abdomen. This is a male. I can tell it's male just by the photo. I mean, look at this guy. He's got this heavy maculation on his face, makes him look kind of goofy. He's kind of shaggy, hairy, and he just kind of disheveled all about. But I mean, he's just cute as can be, I think. Kind of funny looking cute. Willow is among the most important pollinator plants in the spring. I know willow doesn't need pollinators for pollination because it's wind pollinated, but the pollinators sure do need its pollen. We have collected Andrena, this Andrena species. I know this is not a willow flower. Sorry, I'm going to show. I forgot to tell you that I'm still building my my bee library, and so I'm going to have some photos that these are not on the right plants, and they may not be the exact same species for that plant, but they're at least in the right genus. Okay, so this is an Andrena, an early spring bee. They're called mining bees because they do nest in the ground. But willow is a super important plant. So if you have space for willow in your yard, put a willow. Tall Oregon grape is another one of the early spring bloomers. This attracts all kinds of bees, but especially I know that it is really attractive to bumblebees. So here's a hunty-eye bumblebee. I know this is hunty-eye by the color pattern on its belly. Look, and you'll be able to tell this too. The first section is yellow. Then there's an orange section, another orange section, and either yellow or pale white, followed by black. So yellow, orange, orange, yellow, black is a hunty-eye bumblebee. And now, of course, you'll remember that. And other bumblebees are attracted to tall Oregon grape also, like this yellow-faced bumblebee, Bombus bosnasensky. Now, my wax currant has been blooming for about 2 weeks, easily 2 weeks. And even before it started blooming, I saw male Anthophora buzzing about this plant. once it starts blooming, I mean, there are Anthophora, early Anthophora bees, which is a digger bee, so they live in the ground too, all over this plant. They will actually do aerial combat with each other, the males primarily, because yes, they get a little territorial. They don't want another male around. They want to be the one to pass their DNA. But this is a great plant in the spring. And I like it because it's very drought tolerant, pretty drought tolerant. And it gets some, in the bottom corner, you can see the fruit set that it has. So birds will eat the fruit and so on. The other thing I like about this plant is every couple of years in my dry landscape, I get a couple new plants set seed that have seeded themselves from this plant. So here is a picture of a little male Anthophora. How can I tell he's male? Well, look at the maculations on his face, heavily maculated, and he's pretty shaggy. So that tells me he's male. A plant that is related to the wax currant is this golden currant, Rites aureum, and it's going to attract the same kind of bees. It started blooming in my landscape about maybe a week after the wax currant, but I tell you what, I have a variety, and I don't know if it's accidental, if it's true for all golden currants, but it has the most wonderful scent of clove that you can imagine. And I purposely walk past it several times, as much as I can, several times a day, just to get that fragrance. There's a great little shrub, Rhus trilobata. You might know it as Grolleau sumac, or it's also called Rhus aromatica, variety trilobata. It's native more to a little bit more east of us, Eastern Oregon, Idaho, Utah. It has great fall color, but and it's going to bloom about May to June. Unfortunately, you probably, unless you're really inspecting things, won't notice the bloom. It's unnoticeable. It's not what we as gardeners would call a flower, okay? But bees are all over this plant. I have some friends that collect bees with us, and they have this plant in their garden, and they have collected over 9 species of bees off this garden early, and they collected a really, really rare, unusual Lasioglossum that has a dark thorax and a red abdomen. Very, very unusual. And it too sets sets fruit for possible bird use. Here's a little Hylaeus bee that you would find. This is called the masked bee. And again, remember I told you the Hylaeus doesn't have much hair, but look, there's a little bit of hair on his head and on her thorax. She's the one that actually takes the pollen and nectar inside and regurgitates it out later. And here's that Lasioglossum I was talking about with the dark thorax and head and the red abdomen. The next plant is mountain mahogany. Now, mountain mahogany, I think in native form is much like you see here. It's not this plant here. Mountain mahogany is here and in the background. And the owner is doing a great job of hiding, I think it was a propane tank, by using these mountain mahogany. Mountain mahogany blooms, being an early bloomer, is going to attract the early andrinas also. And my friend Phil has taken his mountain mahogany and done some, patiently pruned and trained them into small trees. I think these are just spectacular. What a good looking plant in a yard. And so here's the andrina, the mining bees that are common to mountain mahogany. Now, Acerginella, vine maple, which is this flame maple, vine maple and red maples are really good for pollinators also. Lots of different kind of pollinators, including butterflies, flower flies, and wasps use this. In fact, my first year in the Oregon Bee Atlas, this is not Acerginella, but the bee is the one I want to tell you about. is, sorry, that's my timer. Excuse me. Okay. So, I'm sorry, this Bombus morsonii, which is on the threatened species list, was visiting Acer genella in my garden, and I was just so excited. This is Bombus morsonii on an Agastache that I had in my garden at a different time. Here's a plant that you may or may not want to use. I wouldn't probably put it in an ornamental garden, but certainly in a wildflower garden or as a cover crop, this would be a great plant. And lots of bees use it, especially osmias and this bee called Hoplites, which is related to, it's a Megachilidae rather, I'm sorry. It's a Megachilidae, so it's in the genus of leaf cutters. You can't really see well underneath here, but you can see some little hairs on the belly of this Hoplites. So osmia and Hoplites are especially good on vetch. I think probably a lot of you know this plant. It's Oregon sunshine. It's native to both the west side of Oregon and the east side of Oregon, but they're different genotypes. So the western Oregon sunshine is a much more robust plant. It's not so hairy and woolly looking. It's brighter green. But ours on the east side of the mountains is this kind of downy, cottony, little bit smaller, quite a bit smaller plant, but yet Oregon sunshine at the same time. This is especially attractive to leafcutter bees. Here's my little boy ready to go to the ball again, and his female partner that carries the pollen on the scopal hairs underneath her belly. Next plant is the California poppy. Okay. California poppy is, native really from California, well, further south in California, clear up into, I think I read up into BC, parts of BC. Lots of native bees species are attracted to this. In her research in the garden ecology lab at OSU, student Jen Hayes reports that this plant has like 92% abundance. And so that means that it scores really high in the number of bees that come to this plant. It also scored even higher, 100% in bee diversity. So not only does it attract a lot of bees, but it attracts a lot of different kind of bees, as well as I know butterflies use this too. This is a beautiful Caliopsis female, and she's wallowing in that pollen. Remember, California poppy doesn't have nectar, but it has plenty of pollen. And here's a mating pair of the Caliopsis. The interesting thing about Caliopsis bee is that it is one of the, maybe the only bee that will stay mated as she flies from flower to flower. So, so that's, if you see this happening with a bee, then you can be sure that that's Caliopsis, the male and the female in flight together. This plant maybe not the prettiest of plants, so you may want to plant it in transition areas in your yard. This is called silverleaf hustata. And I didn't really know about this plant until about 6 years ago, when all of a sudden I started seeing it along the edge of the dirt road coming to my property. And I saw this plant. I said, well, first of all, I said, well, that's not a very pretty looking plant. But I started watching it, and boy, the bees just love this. We actually collected some really cool bees on this, this plant for the Oregon Bee Atlas. And so it will recede a little bit. In last year, I think since last fall, I think I've counted about 10 new plants scattered throughout an area where I have this planted. So it will recede a little bit. And if you don't want it to, then of course you would cut off the seed heads. But it's really attractive to many bees. As I said, bees like this small carpenter bee. This is a female. I can tell she's a female because on her face, she has this dashed white line. It's kind of a vertical dash, not a horizontal dash. And of course, her body shape and the lack of hairs it tells me she's a small carpenter bee. Not only carpenter bees, but one of my very favorite bees, this big-headed Ashmediella timberlakei. I love this bee. I caught him my first year and I just fell in love with it, with her, I should say. Look at the size of her head compared to the rest of her body. I wonder how she can even fly at all. And then of course, I love chocolate. So this chocolate abdomen just is really striking for me. It also attracts the green metallic agapostemon. Here she is on the fiddle neck. It's in the borage family, so it forms kind of like a fiddle neck flower head, and it uncurls as the flowers mature. So it's really got a pretty long flower time. I don't really know much about this plant, but basically what I did is I had it in, I took it out, I put it back in, I took it out. I finally decided, no, put it back in because it has the same rating in Jen Hayes' research that the California poppy. So what it's an annual, this Globigerina is an annual. So I'm thinking, what a wonderful combination with California poppy. I mean, that blue would be stunning with the orange of the poppy. And they have the same rating. So that means basically they attract a lot of bees and they attract a high diversity or different types of bees. So I just think this plant would be stunning with California in, like, say, a wildflower garden, California poppy, sorry, in a wildflower garden. So the catmint, I know that a lot of people are familiar with catmint. It's really popular with just about any pollinator that I know, bees, butterflies, I even see some moths on there from time to time, flower flies. It's really good for the generalist bee, the bee that lives a long time like Bombus or Halictides, because they have a life cycle from spring to fall. And this flower blooms from spring to fall. So it's a wonderful resource for those generalist bees. And here's a bombus, one of the bumblebees on that plant. And here's another bumblebee. Now, I don't think this one's Morsonia. I think this one's actually Bombus nevadensis, because it could be Morsonia. It's really hard to tell because I would tell by the length of the face and a little black area on its back, whether it's, sorry, my laser is not moving out of the picture. But nevadensis has a long face and a black patch on the back. Hardy ice plant is a great plant for us. It's, it's a ground cover. It's got kind of a waxy coating, so it's fairly succulent. So it's going to be good in the in drought conditions, though I think it does take a little bit more water than sometimes we think. But here we see this big bombus, almost too big for the flower. But bees that I find on this plant mostly are in the family Halictidae, like this Halictus, and little Lasioglossoms, also kind of in the same family as the Halictus pictured here. I think you all know, well, many people know about penstemon. It's a great plant. It's a native to our area. It grows in all kinds of conditions, from really crummy, rocky, bare ground, low soil conditions. So obviously it can be very drought tolerant, but these all kinds of native bees really like this plant. And depending on the species of penstemon that you're growing, hummingbirds will like it too. So here we see, I know bees aren't supposed to like reds, but look at the nectar guides in this penstemon. And so this bumblebee is not having a hard time at all finding nectar. So here we have globe mallow. Our horticulture agent, Amy Jo Detweiler, introduced me to this species a few years ago, and it is just a killer plant in the garden. It's long flowering. I think mine goes from May to about September, blooming in my garden, and it can really carry a garden throughout the whole summer, just like the catmint does. And what a nice combination. Here we go with that orange and kind of that lighter blue color. I think that's a striking combination of colors. It likes a fairly dry garden. In my native garden, it actually reseeds. I probably get 6 or 7 new plants from seeds that have germinated. I probably get 6 or 7 a year off of globe mallow. Here in this globe mallow, we can see the green agapostemon bee. This is a female collecting pollen. And I'm sorry, this came off a video I took, so it's blurry, but I wanted you to see the color difference between the female. The female is all green. There's only one species that's not all green, but the male has the green or blue thorax, and then he's got yellow and black striping on his abdomen. So if you see one of these bees with the green thorax and yellow and black striping, you know it's a male agapostemon. Mock orange is another plant that is really attractive to Andrena, like this guy. Is this a male or a female? I hope you told me it's a male. Look at the maculation on his face. And he's kind of goofy looking. He's kind of shaggy looking. So we know this is a male. Of course, scientifically, we would do a lot of different determinations, counting the number of segments in his antenna and so forth. But just by looks, I can tell this is a male. Okay. We have a native mock orange in our native garden at the extension office, and it's in a pretty dry condition. It's growing slowly, but it's doing well. Okay, what pollinator doesn't love chokecherry? I don't know what pollinator. I don't know if there is a pollinator that doesn't like this plant, other than maybe bats and hummingbirds. But wow, the insects are attracted to this plant like a magnet. So many bees. Here you can see this little, probably Halictus, I'm not sure, but I'm going to call it Halictus by striping and so forth on this. And then it also attracts a lot of other pollinators, and especially the Western tiger swallowtail. This is the larvae of the Western tiger swallowtail on the leaves of chokecherry, our native chokecherry, the green leaf chokecherry. This will pupate and turn into the Western tiger swallowtail. This pea shrub, this pea shrub is not a native, but it also attracts a lot of different pollinators. Well, I can't say that. No, let me retract that. I was told by my friends in Tumalo that this is primarily a bumblebee attractant. They have actually seen 5 different species of bumblebee on this plant at the same time, all at the same time. So here we have 2 different bumblebees that they see. You can actually see these are the flower of the pea plant, pea shrub that the bumblebees have been photographed by Pete on. Lamb's ear is another great pollinator plant for our bees, or bee plant. Here you can see a bombus. Not sure if it's Morsonii or Nevadensis. They're about the same size, about the same coloration. You can see there's a little black spot on the back of this bee. It might indicate Nevadensis, but Morsonii, if she goes in and out of her nest too much, she'll get a little bald spot there too. But here's Huntii going toward it, and here's the bee Anthidium, which is Megachilidae bee. Notice the hairs on the bottom of her abdomen. This actually, yeah. So this is a little bee that the coloration on it is created by colors in the exoskeleton, not by hairs. I'm sorry about the beeping. I have a timer, so I keep on track. So I apologize for that. But let me talk a little bit more about this bee. She will scrape off the hairs of things like lamb's ear. So she's called a wool carder bee because she's taking the wool off the plant and she's using that as a nesting substrate. Scarlet Gilia is really good for, obviously red hummingbirds, but some bumblebees will go to this also. I know some people aren't going to like this plant, but it's not the most beautiful of plants, but the flower is absolutely stunning. And this giant blazing star, Mentzelia laevicalis, it takes absolutely dry conditions. As you're driving about in Central Oregon, you'll see this quite often on the roadsides at road cuts and so forth. In fact, that's where I collected my seed for this, was just on one of those road cuts. And it will reseed, not strong, not heavily. It produces a ton of seed, but not all those seeds germinate, not very many. And it's biennial, so it's going to have the rosette in the first year and then have the blossom the second year. Hyssops, we know that Agastache hyssops are really great pollinator magnets. The bees love this. The reds are said to be more drought tolerant, reds and pinks, and the blues may be a little bit less drought tolerant. I find that the blues are much less or much shorter lived in my garden, and I can get Agastache rupestris hummingbird mint. It'll come up from seed. I probably get 3 or 4 plants a year of it coming up through seed. But here's another bumblebee, probably Morrisonii, the threatened bumblebee species that we see frequently in our area. And here's a bumblebee on a pink one, so blue and pink. So they don't seem to mind the color difference, even though they're not supposed to, bees aren't supposed to be attracted to reds. Again, those nectar guides must have something to do with it. But I like to take a look at these 2 bees right here. The bee on the left, I'm sure is Morrisonii, because look, she does not have the black patch as the bee on the right, who has the black patch. That tells me it's Nevadensis. Russian sage. A lot of people grow this. It used to be called Perovskia atripilcifolia. It has now been deemed a salvia. So the new name for Russian sage, the new botanical name, is Salvia yangii. It got changed, I think, in 2020. But it too, it's a great late summer bloomer, starting in about late July in my yard. And it attracts this little tiny small carpenter bee, as well as bumblebees, anthophorus, flower flies, just all kinds of pollinators love this plant. I have read that it doesn't provide pollen, it provides nectar only, but hey, everybody needs energy to fly around, so it's still a great plant in your garden. And probably, I'm just going to say it. This is probably the most important fall blooming plant in our area. It's a member of the Asteraceae family, so it's an aster. If you didn't like rabbit brush before, I hope you go away loving rabbit brush, because so many of our pollinators, our native bees, our butterflies, our beetles are using this plant at the end of the season. In fact, we get so many collections off rabbit brush because it's one of the few things blooming here at the end of the season, that the OBA, the Oregon Bee Atlas taxonomist, said that we were destroying the data because all we did is collect off rabbit brush in the fall, and it skewed its numbers. I'm going, well, that's all we have blooming in the fall in the desert. So yeah, we have a little thing going about that. And the little Perdita, this is in the genus, the family Andrenidae. This is a little Perdita. She probably, this is that 6 millimeter bee that I showed earlier. She probably nests directly under rabbit brush. just to conserve her energy so she doesn't have to fly very far to collect pollen for her babies. This is like the perfect plant according to the Garden Ecology Lab at OSU, where Jen Hayes and I forgot his name, sorry, did their work. Andrew worked on this, and this Douglas aster was the perfect plant. It scored 100% on bee abundance, so tons of bees go to it, and 100% in bee diversity. So it attracts the most number of native bees of any of the plants in their study. It does like moist conditions, however. So, unless you have that moist area in your garden or a little creek running through it or something like that, you might struggle with this. It's rhizomatous, so if it likes the place, it's going to grow big. Blue Miss Spirea, I think this is my last photo, is great as a late pollinator plant, bee plant. Remember the leafcutter bees I said come out about July-ish? Well, this plant is going to start blooming August, September. And so it is really a heavy hitter for leafcutter bees, such as this leafcutter, pugnacious leafcutter bee. Notice the scopal hairs or the pollen collecting hairs on the bottom of her abdomen. We can easily see she's a leafcutter bee. If she's carrying pollen there, you could easily see she's a leafcutter bee. The last thing I want to talk about with the native bees is, I asked if all bees collect pollen. The answer was no. Are all bees good pollinators? The answer is no. There are such things as cuckoo bees. They're actually kleptoparasites of other bees. Okay? Here are just 3 of the cuckoo bees that we have in our area: the Nomada, the Triepholus, and the Stelis. These bees don't collect pollen. They will nectar. Okay? They don't collect pollen because they don't make their own nest. They actually wait. They have different habits, but they might wait for a female solitary bee to leave her nest. They'll go into that nest, lay an egg on the side of the nest, and then exit before she comes back, before the homeowner comes back. So that egg will hatch sooner or earlier than the homeowner's egg hatches, and that larva will either consume the egg or consume the larva, and then also feed on the pollen that the solitary bee left for her babies. So these are kleptoparasites of native bees, and we have lots of them. All right, so here I just want to show you the picture of Dr. Gail Langolato. She is the statewide coordinator for the Master Gardener program. She is also the lead professor at the Garden Ecology Lab, and I just wanted to thank her for some information and thank her students for information and research that they're doing on native bees and pollinators, native bees especially, and trying to determine the best plants that you might plant in your garden. And much of my information on this talk came from this book, The Bees in Your Backyard. One of the authors, Olivia Messenger Carroll, actually spent many summers doing studies in the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. And oh wow, she's stunning. She's a stunning woman. But anyway, she and her partner, writing partner, Joseph Wilson, wrote this great, wonderful book that I would encourage if you're interested in bees at all. The citizen scientists can easily read through this bee, and it takes a little bit of studying. Took me a little bit of studying, but it's a stunning book. Well, there are some plants that I didn't show today, like alyssum and gaillardia and sunflower and lots of different plants that I could have chosen, but I chose to really talk about or highlight the early spring and the late fall. Really get plants on there that are most important to me and to the early and late bees, because the summer garden seems to usually have plenty of floral resources for most of our pollinators. That wraps it up for this talk. I'm ready to take questions if there are any. So I guess I will stop sharing.
And yes, Tony, you do have questions. That was amazing. Wow. Who knew?
Who knew? I
Who
didn't.
knew?
I didn't before I started studying them.
Yeah, who knew? Well, we have two questions that I think you answered, but I just want to make sure that we give the folks the attention to them. One of them you referred to early on about the person being curious about specific flowering plants and attractiveness to bees versus hummingbirds and the territorialness of them. And is it best to keep specific pollinator gardens separate?
I personally don't think there's a need for that. I haven't seen anything that indicates that hummingbirds are going to, push out the bees. Bees will be hummingbirds will be territorial to other hummingbirds. Bees will be territorial. Some are much more territorial, like Anthopteras are territorial, Anthidiums are territorial, and they'll guard the floral resources for the females, but there's not a lot of that goes on. As far as bees, the biggest problem that probably native bees have are honeybees. And so that's why I really wanted to make that point about if you're not raising honeybees for the honey, the better choice would be just putting in a garden for all bees, because we know it's been documented that too many honeybee hives in one area really reduces the floral resources for native bees, and the native bee count drops drastically. But as far as other territorialism, I just don't see it as a problem as long as you have different types of blooms, different colors, different shapes. There's going to be enough for everybody.
Okay, perfect. One other question that I think that you did answer a couple of times, but I just want to make sure that everybody's clear with it. Can bees still nest when the ground is covered with 2 to 3 inches of mulch?
Again, the ground nesting bees can't dig through that mulch. So that's why on that one photo, I gave some ideas, some hints about, pulling the mulch away from snags, pulling it away from logs or rocks. If you've got rock walls, that's a great place for native bees. Underneath large clumps of flowers, pull the mulch out so that the bees can get to the bare, almost bare. It doesn't have to be absolutely bare, but it can't have a couple of inches of mulch. They'll never get down to it. I mean, these are only little tiny things. Many of them are like 8 millimeters big. They're not going to dig through 2 inches of mulch.
Okay. Well, I thought you answered those two, but I just wanted to make sure that we were clear with our participants. Okay, lots of other questions. One attendee would like to know, do honeybees nest in the ground?
No, honeybees nest naturally. They find large cavities like hollowed out trees or something like that. They're going to build their hive in those. Okay. You see that photo that I showed of the beekeeper, and he had all of those. I don't even know what those are called. My friend Heike is going to shoot me, but all those little inserts in the honeybee hive. So they normally nest in a cavity, not in the ground at all.
Okay, good. So Sue asked if it's good to make a shallow pan of water for moisture for the bees.
Yeah, it is. Okay, mason bees, they need a little bit of moisture to pat their, whether it be masticated leaf or whether it be absolutely mud, they're going to need a little bit of moisture in order to make that pliable. All insects need moisture, though most of them get it through like nectar and that kind of stuff. They're not actually sipping water, though some actually do. But if you have a pail of water, I like that the question is a shallow dish or something, absolutely shallow. Bees and pollinators need something shallow, or a rock or something inside, because if they get into a deep pan, like a bucket or a bowl or something, they can't get out and they'll just drown.
Okay, great. Okay, another attendee asked that they have wasps nesting in our rock wall every year. By controlling them, are we endangering native bees?
Well, I don't honestly know that. I don't know that native bees are going to be necessarily nesting where big wasp colonies are, because they're big colonies. And so, but the more important part is, if they're creating danger for the family or for the people, and you can't bypass that area, then you may have to control them somehow. Yeah, it'd be great to be able to just cordon off an area and say, hey, don't walk in this area or something like that, but that's not always possible. I don't know how closely native bees nest to, say, a wasp, an area that wasps would be in. I'm thinking that probably like yellow jackets or something like that, they're not going to nest too closely because yellow jackets are carnivorous. And so they could be, pardon the pun, but sitting ducks.
That was actually a very popular question, Tony. Several people upvoted that question. So, okay, this one also, more than one person was interested in this answer, is what's the difference between pollen and nectar?
Okay, pollen is the resource that has proteins for building the body and so forth. Okay, nectar is the resource that has the carbohydrates, the sugars, and so forth for energy. So they leave pollen, the protein source, the fats and oils and so forth, as some adults will use it as food, but not too many. Most bees are taking that pollen and they're making that little ball of pollen bead, and then they lay their egg on the pollen bead and they close off the bedroom for that egg, and they build the next one for the next bee. But when the larva hatches out and starts feeding, it's using this protein source to grow and mature. It doesn't need quick energy to fly from place to place like the adults do. It needs that solid protein source to build its body. So I hope that pollen is a protein source, nectar is as an energy sugary source.
So like an energy drink versus a hamburger.
Yeah. Right.
And I have to just comment really quickly. It is literally raining snow right now at my house.
Good for you.
This is awesome.
Good for your house.
Yes, it is. I'm getting good precipitation. Okay, so another question someone asked, because you went over a lot of different kinds of bees, and the question was, are any of these bees referred to as hover bees?
There are hover flies. There are bees that can hover, but I have never heard them called hover bees. There are bees that can hover, however.
Okay. And Terry wants to know how you collect the bees for your studies.
Well, for this study, we net them. Primarily, we collect them with nets. There are some people, and I have in the past collected some bees in what are called vein traps, blue vein traps. It's a bottle that has a blue top and kind of signals the bee into that, and it has a solution in there, which of course they drown in. And then there are little other things called bowl traps, which have fluorescent paint. Usually they're yellow, blue, and white. In this fluorescent paint, you put some type of maybe a dishwashing solution or some type of a polypropylene in the bowls, and the bees go in there, and of course they can't get out. So we use them, we collect them that way for our studies. But I would say 95% of us are netting, are netting bees.
Okay,
with a net.
with a net. Yeah, indeed. Okay, Bob would like to know where to buy the native plants.
Well, we have a couple of native nurseries in our area. So that would certainly be a choice. I'm sure some of the other nurseries that that don't specialize in natives would have some native plants. That's not going to be their specialty, but there are going to be some native plants there. So in our area, that's what I do. You could also, I think U.S. Forest Service, I'm not sure about BLM, but the Forest Service does allow digging of native plants with permitted only, and there's limitations, but so that's a possibility for getting native plants. But purchasing a couple of native nurseries in our area, and I'm like I said, I'm sure the general nurseries will have some natives.
Okay, and they can always check the OSU website for more information about specific types of plants through the landscape link. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Tara would like to know about fruit trees. She has several of them, and she wonders, do I need a large variety of flowers, or will the fruit trees be enough to attract the bees?
Tara, fruit trees are only in bloom so long, right? About 3 or 4 weeks, maybe at the best. So they're only going to attract bees as long as there's flowers on them. So they're a very short, reduced period of time. So if you want bees throughout the whole season, you have to have floral resources throughout that whole season. So fruit trees are only helpful. Any flower is only helpful as long as it is, any plant is only helpful as long as it's producing flowers.
Okay, just a couple more questions. Actually, we're doing really well. Another attendee would like to know, what common plants do you not recommend for pollinators, or are they all good?
Well, for pollinators, pollinators there's a lot of different kinds of pollinators. So I would, just mix your plants. I don't know, that's not my forte. I'm really studied what's not good for pollinators. So I can't, obviously Russian sage doesn't have any pollen, it's nectar only. So as far as collecting pollen, nobody's going to collect, they're not getting the pollen, they're getting the nectar. But it's a great pollinator plant regardless. So I don't really have a good answer for that, because I have not studied which plants are, great, produce a lot of pollen and which ones don't. And so that's not my forte.
So
Sorry.
we could say a diverse planting would cover the bases.
A diverse planting would cover the bases. And so if you have a diverse planting and then you have something that's not really great, what's it matter? I mean, you don't have to have great pollinator plants in all parts of your garden.
Okay, just two more so far. Bob asks, should pine needles from spring cleanup be kept until July or so, or can we get rid of them in the spring? And I think it had to do with your section about leaving some debris.
Well, pine needles are a little bit different story. I mean, there might be some butterflies that put their chrysalis on them, but I don't think so. I think in that case, we've got to worry about fire. We've got to worry about all these other things. Pine needles are something you should get rid of. I'm talking about like your garden. When I was talking about that, I was really referring more to the garden cleanup, not out of the garden site. But yeah, pine needles, we've got to keep everything safe. So get rid of them.
Okay. Well, one last question, and this was an interesting one, and we have many of us have seen the cover of the book that Gail is on, and this attendee asked, what was that scientist doing with the tube in her mouth on the cover of the book you showed us?
Okay, so that photo had nothing to do with the book. I just want to make that clear. Gail was actually in that particular tool for an entomologist is you take the tube and you put it up next to an insect that you want to collect, and it goes into the jar, which has a like a filter, a screen. So so when you suck in to collect that insect, the insect doesn't go into your throat. It's stopped by a filter, a screen, and only in the force of your lungs breathing in or sucking in collects that specific insect that she's looking for. So it's an insect collection device. I haven't actually used that one. I do have plans to learn how though.
Okay. Well, Tony, those were all of the questions. So I think that we're done. And I'm going to share my screen really quickly with our folks who are remaining on. You've got quite a few people still on. And for all of our attendees, I would like to thank all of you for coming today. I'd like to thank Tony for her wealth of knowledge and enthusiasm for bees. And I want to remind our participants that are recording the webinar and the links and resources, we will send some things out to you in the email that you'll get. And that'll be coming sometime later in the week. We will also have a survey that will start when you log out, or it will also be on the email. And please fill that out because we do use that to help us improve the garden offerings that we make to our gardening public. And don't forget to visit our silent auction. The web link is right there. It's still going on through next Saturday. And we'd also like to thank our sponsors and all of you for coming to us on this day. Thank you so much, and great day. And I think that that's it for us. And thanks to all of you who commented in the Q&A about the presentation. Tony got lots of folks saying, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And it was awesome. So much information. So with that, everyone, thank you so much for coming today. Be careful out there in that snow. And thank goodness we're getting precipitation. So I'm going to sign us off. I just want to check, make sure. Okay, just checking, no more questions, and we're good. So thank you, everybody, and we're signing off.